Greetings and thanks for coming to my channel, Robert the Appraiser. I'm Robert Hall with Appraisal of Kentucky. I'm a real estate appraiser, and this channel is to help realtors so that realtors can understand the appraisal process in ways that benefit them in their real estate practice. Today I want to talk about the contribution value of additional acreage, or you might say, how does larger acreage lots contribute to the value of your listing? And then on top of that, how do you make comparisons? For example, let's say that you have a house and it's in a suburban area outside of the city, in an area where many properties have more than 5, more than 10, maybe even more than 15 or 20 acres. Let's just hypothetically say that your property that you are considering listing has 10 acres. And when you look at the comparables in the area, you see a similar house that only has 3 acres. You see another similar house that has 19 acres. You see another similar house that has 31 acres. To complicate things even more, there's one right down the street that has the same number of acres, but it's a different type of house, and so on. So you have some very complicated issues. Well, today in this video, I'm going to show you how to simplify the acreage problem. It's not as difficult as you might imagine. And if you follow along with me, I'm going to show you just some basic, simple arithmetic. The type of the level of mathematics that you'll need to understand is about the 5th or 6th grade level of mathematics. And I'll show you a very simple way to isolate the variable of additional acreage lots and having wide varieties in your between your subject property and your comparables. So with that, let's just go ahead and get right into it, and I'll show it to you. So I've designed a course to help realtors in the specific situation when they are looking at a property that they may either list for sale, or perhaps you have a client that is interested in purchasing, and the property has a large tract of acres, one single family home on an acreage tract. And the question is, how do we account for the value of the additional acreage? Now, what you see on the screen, automatically you'll notice there are 4 photos of houses. These houses are random, hypothetical, fictitious, you might say. I picked these out of a multitude of possibilities only to illustrate a point. Now, all the data that we're looking at here and the analysis that we will go through in this course is based on an actual case that I recently completed for a client who had a similar home to what you're looking at on an acreage tract over 15 acres. And this data that you see on the screen is only redacted or moderately modified from the actual data on the comparables that I used. Okay, now the point of this is I'm showing you something very similar to a real case, but I've changed the data just enough so that I'm not giving away any confidential information. But the 4 properties that I have intentionally selected them so that they can illustrate the case and so that I can show you how to handle this particular problem. Okay, because what happens when you're working outside of the major city where all of the lots are under half an acre is when you're out in acreage part of a county, you won't always have, say, 15-acre tracts. You won't have all of your comps with 15 acres. Your subject might have 9. You might have a comp that you want to use that has 2, and another comp that has 11, and another comp that has 20, and another comp that has 24. And as a real estate agent, you should always be learning and growing and becoming more sophisticated in your knowledge of your craft. And so I'm challenging you, and I'm recommending that you take the time to go through this course as I've crafted it and constructed it to be beneficial for you, the real estate agent, and that we'll apply basic mathematics no farther than about 6th or 7th grade, and I'll show you the formulas, how to isolate the differences in acreage, and you'll be able to make comparisons as if every single house was the same size lot. Say they were all 1 acre lots. That's what I aim to do in this course, and I will do that. Your part is to be patient, walk through this with me, and we will get this done. And when you finish, if you apply yourself, then when you run into this scenario and you're talking to that proverbial seller who is thinking about selling a house and maybe talking to a number of real estate agents, and when he discusses his case with you, he will get an understanding that you have skills beyond the other realtors that he or she are interviewing as a potential listing agent. So now I just want to show you what we refer to in appraising as the adjustment grid or the adjustment section. Now, what I have on the screen comes out of a highly summarized appraisal. It is not as detailed as the common appraisal that we use, which is referred to as a URAR, Uniform Standard Residential Appraisal Report. That's what's required by lenders. This is a summary report, and I chose this for a couple reasons. One, so that I can simplify things, and two, it fits on my screen better for this appraisal or for this video. Now, I'm not going to leave us here very long, so don't become overwhelmed at the extreme amount of data and lots of mathematical calculations. And before you might think this might be too complicated, let me say, even if I were to teach this to you, you would find that it is very basic arithmetic. Okay, and what an appraiser does most of the time is they use very basic arithmetic, and they just take their time and they work through one problem after another until they have some thing that looks like this mess that you see right here. But I wanted to show you this before I show you my next screen, which is right here. And what I've done here is I've just isolated one little section from the same spreadsheet that you just saw. By the way, the spreadsheet we just looked at is the exact same set of data that we saw for our 4 original properties, which was a subject property and 3 comparables. Okay, I've made these the spreadsheet and the comparable examples, they're the same. Okay, so what we're looking at here is just a zoomed in version of where I'm comparing only the subject property to comparable 1, only from basically the address section down to the land size section. Now you see at the top I've got the addresses, and I've used a fictitious address for the subject. I made it Subject Property Road, Brooks, Kentucky, and for the comparable I made it Comparable 1 Lane, Shepherdsville, Kentucky. And then you see at the bottom where it says site, the subject has 19 acres and the comparable has 13 acres. And you see a plus 69,000 in the comparable box right next to the 13 acres. Now let me explain what I've done. We always adjust the comparable to the subject. Okay, so what I've done is I've balanced out the fact that our comparable does not have as big of a lot, because the lot for the comparable, or the tract, is 13 acres and the subject is 19. So we must add something to the comparable to try to bring it into alignment. Now, I realize right now I'm showing you land and land size differences, and this is where I think most agents would agree that there's a deficiency that the agents have. But you've all done this in cases, for instance, where you have one house that does not have a 2-car garage or any garage at all, and another house that has a garage. And you understand that a garage is worth $10, $12, $15, $16,000. And so let's say your comparable has a garage and your subject doesn't, and everything else is very similar. So you just take what the comparable sold for and you subtract the value of a garage from it, adjusting the comparable to the subject. That's all we've done here. But what I want to get into is showing you where that $69,000 came from. But before we go there, I want to go ahead and show you a larger screenshot of the subject being compared to all three comparables. And you see that the subject again has 19 acres. This is still just a screenshot of the original adjustment grid that I showed you, which is based on the original four properties that I showed you. And you see that comparable 1 has 13 acres, less acres than the subject. Comparable 2 has 21 acres, which is more than the subject. And comparable 3 has 26 acres, which is significantly more than the subject. And we see that there's a relatively large positive adjustment for comparable 1, comparing it to the subject, because our subject has 6 additional acres. Now, again, we're going to get into where I came up with these numbers. I'm just showing you, for an example, in comparable 2, which has more acres than the subject, we have a negative adjustment of 23,000. And in the case of comparable 3, which has significantly more acreage, we have a very large negative adjustment of 80,500. Now, I'm just giving you a very close-up view, just isolating the mathematics or the adjustments that I've used for the subject, which is the 19 acres, and then comparable 1, which is 13 acres, comparable 2, which is 21 acres, and comparable 3, which is 26 acres. I'm just breaking out the land adjustments, okay? Bear with me. I know this may look very complicated at this point, but if you stay and you apply yourself to what you're doing, it's going to make sense. And you may need to go through this video 2 or 3 times over a couple of days. Take some notes and really apply yourself here. But if you do this, when you run into that customer, okay, who has a case like this, I assure you they're going to be very impressed with your knowledge base and your skill set for how to handle the difference in these large acreage tracts. Okay, so what I've got on the screen right now is an Excel spreadsheet. Now, what I'd like to do in the future, I don't have myself set up for this, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to just email me, and I'll send you these Excel spreadsheets just by email with a little pamphlet on how to apply them so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel when you're doing something like this. But let's just go ahead and let me show you what I've done here. I took 6 actual sales. Now, these sales are not redacted or modified. I haven't changed anything about them because they are public sales. The data is publicly known, easily accessed on the internet. There's nothing confidential about these numbers. So they're actual sales that really occurred in Bullitt County, Kentucky. For example, sale number 3 is 245 Forest Hills Road, Shepherdsville, Kentucky, 40165. That's comparable 3. It's sold for $354,870. It's land only, by the way. I don't know if I made that clear up front. We're looking at land sales. These are not comparable house sales. They're land sales. And I'm showing you how we can get to our computations that I just showed you. So, for example, comp number 5 is 1 Watson Lane, Shepherdsville. And you see near the on the right side where it says sale price, and then just right of that it says acres, and then right of that it says dollar per acre. This is where your simple math comes in. I told you up front that we were going to use some basic elementary arithmetic. So just look at comparable 1 for a moment. This is a good round number because comparable 1 actually did just have 10 acres. Okay, I haven't rounded that. It was a 10-acre tract that sold for $245,000. And so you see, using simple math, that was $24,500 per acre. Now, comparable 2, you see, was quite a bit more expensive. It sold for $440,000. It was a much larger tract, $45,000, and it sold for $9,624 per acre. Now you see a very wide discrepancy or range between the lowest price land here at $6,195 and the most expensive land of $24,500. In part, this is why we use 6 comparable sales and we get a weighted average. Now, I don't have weeks or months to get into to show you how you could distill that down and become even more precise in figuring these out, but I can tell you this, that for the purposes of a residential appraisal that I do, this methodology suffices just fine. We don't need to go any further than that. We've used 6 comparables. There is a broad range of prices and values and also land sizes. And what I've done at the bottom is I've come up with an average price per acre of $11,458. Okay, that's for raw land in and around my subject neighborhood. So we can just take that number and let's go ahead and round it up to $11,500. Okay, now we're going to go back to momentarily to our spreadsheet, and we're going to look at that, and we can see these numbers again, where we've got a plus 69,000 for sale 1 and a negative 23,000 for sale 2 and a negative 80,500 for sale 3. We know that we're using a rate of 11,500 per acre. Now I'm showing you the actual mathematics of how we got there. Okay, this is a very simple spreadsheet. Those numbers that you see in red represent negative. Okay, and the numbers in black represent positive. And these are the same comparables that we just looked at. Okay, comparables 1 through 3 being compared to the subject. Remember, the subject has 19 acres, and comparable 1 has 13, and comparable 2 has 21, and comparable 3 has 26. Okay, and you see that with regard to comparable 1 and the subject, there is a difference. This is the second column over. There's a difference of 6 acres. See, 19 minus 13 equals 6. And then you see going left to right from the 6, there's a multiplication symbol at times. And then you see our land rate of 11,500. And then it says equals $69,000. Drop down to comparable 2. And you see our number of 21 acres. And that's a difference of negative 2. Because our subject has 19 and the comparable has 21. So you have a negative 2 times your 11,500. And you get a negative $23,000 adjustment. And then so on with comparable 3, which has 26 acres, which is a 7-acre difference. So you have a negative 7 because the comparable is larger than the subject times our land value of 11,500. And there you get your negative $80,500. So thank you so much for joining me and watching this video on how to compare your subject property to the comparables when both your subject and the comparables have acreage size lots, and they're all varying from just a few acres to maybe over 10 or 20 acres. I hope this was informative. I realize that it was complex, and I do suggest that you watch this video 2 or 3 times, and as I said, take notes. I will tell you that this very problem will come up at some point in your career as a real estate agent, and when it does, if you had looked over this video and really assimilated what I showed you, your client will be very impressed, and as they are comparing you to a number of other agents that they're considering to list their house with, they will notice that you are the one that has the expertise. Thanks again. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe.